Okay, we've built our pen, we've raised our chickens, we built our chicken plucker. Now we need what are they called? I don't know. Killing cones. Our kids called them the cones of silence because they were Get Smart fans. But anyways, we've had a few variations over the years. I've always made them myself, of course. And we're on our third kind of set to these things. But what I used this time was the 24-inch trim coil. You buy in a 50-foot roll and you get it on sale. It's pretty reasonably priced. But that's what I used to make that octagonal composter. And I also use it for all kinds of stuff. So I'm using it to make these cones. This one I already fabricated, and actually I butchered a couple of my old gimpy Cornish Cross that had to leave early. After I used my other cones to butcher them, I stuck them in one in here, pretty 5 1/4 pound dressed out rooster, so he fit okay. You know, they're not ideal. They could be taller, of course, but it works. It works fine. So, you know, if you don't want to spend 20 bucks a piece on these things, all I did is I cut a 2-foot by 2-foot square, and then I just fashioned a compass out of a piece of wood and put a hole right in the center. Just made my cross X's. I found the center of that 2-foot piece, and then I drilled a small hole, put a nail through there, and then another nail at 1 foot, and just etched a circle. And then I just used tin snips and I cut out a circle. This is half. And then I cut that circle in half. And then I just used a hole saw, and I cut like the biggest hole saw size I had, but it needs to be bigger. So I'll cut out, this is probably whatever a quart paint can is, half a quart paint can diameter here. I'm going to cut that out, and then what we'll do is we're just going to fold this get the tops flat, square. We're just going to fold this and throw a few rivets in there, and then we mount it in here. This is kind of our trick. Now I mount 2 of them in this half barrel that I've cut the top off, and I kept the bottom, and in the bottom I have a drain hole. And so all of the blood and the rinse water, you can just hose them down while they're in there. Everything is contained, and I put a bucket underneath this. Now I'll show you how I set this up outside when I get these 2 cones mounted in here. So here is our setup. I finished this other cone. I cut a piece of plywood that was 20 inches long, and then I just put in 1 screw so the plywood would pivot, and so that it would be at an angle, and then I put 2 screws into that plywood in each one. And then here on the outside edge, I just put just a short number 10 bolt through to secure them, so they're good and solid. And so the whole idea then is to have everything collect in this bucket, or in the barrel that will then drain into that bucket. And so I put a support on the back so that it holds it out from the tree, and then I just strap it around the tree. So for those of you who don't have a 30-inch diameter white pine in their backyard, you'll probably have to come up with some other kind of arrangement, but something similar to this. You could even, just strap it against a building, do something like that. Anyways, that's what we do. Tomorrow morning, we'll see how it works. Oh, one other thing. These edges are you know, super sharp. They can really be sharp and need care. So anyone who's anyone who cares to make these, be really aware of that. And we use I file everything down and get it as good as I could. And you could probably tape the edges, but just a word of caution, sharp stuff to work with. So with that, we'll have a report back tomorrow on how that chicken plucker works. Morning, folks. It's been a while since we butchered those chickens, and I wanted to fill you in on how we do it and some of my thoughts on our process, and again on these cones that I built. The edges are sharp, and that's an issue, so I certainly wouldn't recommend these unless you tape the edges, you know, file them down, get them smooth, and tape them up to prevent, because especially on the bottoms where when you make your cut, and those chickens can pull up and they'll pull your thumb right up with it and they can cut. So anyways, a word of caution there. So although these may be an issue with the sharp edges, the idea of mounting cones in a barrel like this, a half barrel cut, that I do like. It really contains everything. It's nice and neat. You can do 2 at a time and it works well. The other thing that we do, and I'll show a little slideshow at the end of this that shows kind of how we went about it, but the other thing we do is we use this, I call it our compactor. It's just a barrier that I stake in the cage. I just lay it down on the ground in front of the cage. I pull the cage over it, and then I open a door and lift it up, and then I just take just a couple pieces of 1/2-inch conduit, and I have mounted in the bottom here. I just use some brackets, some straps, and I put little pieces of 3/4-inch conduit, and I just pound those down in the ground to hold this compactor up. You know, and just use a mallet. And then what I do is I will then pull the cage and start compressing the flock so that I can reach in. And I just made a little snare. I just made this quickly just out of a piece of heavy gauge wire, and I just a hose clamp and some tape, just taped it to a piece of conduit. It works okay, and you just grab one bird at a time out of there. And as the flock gets smaller and smaller, you just keep compressing the flock. And my compactor, I made that years ago, several cage variations ago. I just used 3/4-inch poly water line. You know, it's not ideal. If I'm going to redo one, I'll make one out of metal 1/2-inch conduit, and I'll use my bender, and I'll just fashion it so that it'll fit at least snugly along the sides. At the top it can come down because it has to clear that ridge in the cage. But anyways, it works, and it's a pretty handy way to grab your birds. I just grab one, bring it over, and bleed it out. And then while that one's bleeding out, I go grab a second one, put it in, bleed it out. And then I bring it over, once those two are dead, I will lay them on the ground and I'll hose them off, especially if they're Cornish Cross, because they tend to slide around on their ponderous breasts and their feces. And then I will give them a scald. And our scalder, as you see in the picture, is just a 5-gallon, one of those turkey fryer things that we never use to fry turkeys, but it's a good sized pot. And then I use a long stem thermometer, and I keep it 145 to 150 degrees. And I just keep plunging. I'll count to about 20 to 30 seconds. And after that, I will just start gently pulling on one of the wing feathers. And when that slides out, I'll pull on another one. And when that slides out, once 2 or 3 of them slip out easily, my scald is done. And it varies with the bird, you know, some will get ready quicker than others, so it's a foolproof way for us. We don't over scald them or under scald them that way. The old wing feather method works really well. So I've got the results are in. Our Cornish Cross after 9 weeks averaged dressed weight 6.22 pounds, so basically 6 1/4 pounds. Our Red Rangers after 11 weeks, because remember those were 2 weeks old when we got them and we butchered them at the same time, they averaged 4.16 pounds. You know, 2 pound difference. Maybe I'll rethink the whole Cornish Cross Red Ranger thing. I don't know. I still think quality versus quantity is a factor. If you're just raising them for yourself and the quality of the meat, if you like that old-fashioned chicken flavor that you grew up with, if you're like me, then the Red Rangers, I think, might still be the way to go. And we could have held them another 2 weeks. They're really so easy to raise. I think we'd have boosted that up a little bit more. But anyways, we have one thawing in the refrigerator that we're going to have tomorrow night, so that'll kind of be the real test. Are the Red Rangers worth it? Not to sell, because then I don't think you'd come out, but are they worth it for us to raise for our own meals? So we'll take a walk over. I kept 4 of the hens, the Red Ranger hens. They were kind of small. They would have kind of dropped our average down at that point anyways a little bit, but out of the 11 that we had, only 4 were hens. We did have one scrawny little rooster. He's the guy we're going to eat tomorrow night, but he was only 3 something. So he dropped our average down a little bit. If I was smart, I'd have just kept him with the hens for a couple more weeks, but I wasn't smart. So anyways, we're going to see if these Red Ranger hens in a couple, well, more than a couple weeks, but in a few weeks will start giving us some eggs. If not, they'll end up in the freezer too. But I'm going to fashion a couple nest boxes in there, and that'll be a future video. But they're so content in that cage, it's really kind of fun having them around. So we'll just take a walk over and say hi to them. So here's the girls. They're pretty nice to have around, whether they produce eggs or not. We'll keep them around for a few more weeks.